Christian history is full of weird and wonderful stories, but it also has its fair share of division, violence, and controversy. How do we make sense of it all? Then there's the theology, the big questions of faith that can feel overwhelming. We believe history and theology don't have to be barriers to faith, they can deepen it. Christianity is a centuries-long story of people wrestling with what it means to be part of it. We want to bring that story to life. Well, welcome everyone to another episode of Pep Talk, the Persuasive Evangelism podcast from Solas. I'm your co-host today, Simon Wenham, and as that quote suggests, this episode is covering nothing less than the story of the Christian faith. But before we come to that, I'd like to introduce my co-host, the wise Gavin Matthews. Gavin, how are you doing?
Well, I'm living off being called wise. This hasn't happened to me very often before. It might be the first time, so I'm going to dine out on that one for a while. I'm very well, Simon. Freezing cold up here in Scotland today, but otherwise all good.
Great. Yeah, well, it is a little chilly. So, but I do think wise is a good description for you. But one thing people may not know is that Gavin and I both have a real love of history. So we're looking forward to today's conversation. I'm delighted to introduce our guests, Oliver Dürr and Daniel Kim, who are two of the founders of Christian Story. And I should add, actually, Dan and I also go to the same church and we've done youth work together. But I have to say, actually, this is a side of what he does that I know nothing about. So I'm really looking forward to hearing more about it. So Oliver and Dan, welcome to the show. Could you perhaps start off by saying a little bit about perhaps your own backgrounds and where the idea of Christian Story came from in the first place?
Yeah, thank you for having us. It's great to be in the show. So Dan and I have two different backgrounds, obviously. I'm from Switzerland, he's from Oxford, and he'll say more about himself later. I'm from Switzerland. My background is I'm a theologian, I'm a pastor. I have an academic background in theology, but always had an interest and the need to translate. What does that stuff we research at university do to help us in our actual life with trying to witness, trying to live the life of the faith in a constructive way? So that translation element was always on the back of my mind and part of my vocation, I would say. And we just ended up meeting some point in London, Dan and I, when I was in England for a research stay, and discovered that we have a similar passion about exactly this. And then figured out we have the connections within the academic spheres, within academia. We have a good production company here in Switzerland. And we have Dan's expertise in strategy, media marketing, and all of that together sort of just suggested that something like this needs to be done. Something like the Bible Project, but for church history and theology, needs to be done. And so we just thought we'd dive in and try it out.
So you created Christian Story. So what if you could tell us then, Daniel, introduce yourself and tell us, what is Christian Story?
Yeah, of course. So Simon was saying, I'm Dan and I go to St. Aldate's Church in Oxford. I'm a pastor there, or rather an Anglican curate. My background is, well, I've got a very mixed background. So I did a law degree initially. That wasn't quite right for me. And so I ended up working in advertising for 4.5 years or so in London. And I worked for some various big tech companies and very much specifically in kind of digital online content strategy. Working on YouTube, working on kind of also billboards and movies and TV and stuff. But generally speaking, in that space of advertising, tech, marketing, and kind of to Ollie's same passion, translating quite technical information to millions of people, which was my job. And then after that career, which I loved, I ended up hearing the call from God to ministry and spent the last 4 years training at Wycliffe Hall, and ended up and started my curacy this year, in fact, in a church in Oxford. And Sam and I go to the same church. But in the meanwhile, I think this is, this idea of translating the depth of academia and the richness of the Christian tradition to the laity has been a real passion that I think I had for a very long time. And I think that's kind of where me and Oliver really connected. So what is Christian Story? Very simply, we are a YouTube channel where we bring to life the history and theology of Christianity through beautiful animation. So again, as Ollie was saying, it's like the Bible Project, but for history and theology. And so you can go on to our channel on YouTube and find our videos there. So that's pretty much our vision. That's Christian Story.
You've said you wanted to create a unified family history of the whole story of the Christian faith. Why did you set out to do that? I mean, I would say that's quite ambitious. There's quite a lot of history there. How have you decided what to include, for example?
So we haven't had to decide what to include because we intend to do this for a long time. So we'll just add on what's interesting or inspiring as we go. I think the idea is just that for most people, when they think about church history or theology, nothing comes to mind, or something like the Crusades or institutional abuse or negative stuff. And at the same time, we know as theologians, part of our training there has also been a lot of inspiring stuff. Many people have tried and have lived their faith in different ages in a way that's inspiring to us. And so we wanted to tell that story and tell it in a way that's accessible. And that's one of our big challenges, different to the Bible Project, which basically can focus on the Bible, whom people disagree on how to interpret it, but everybody thinks the Bible is important. How do you engage with the differences in traditions, with the different sort of also fractures and conflicts you would have had? And our approach is to have just a generous reading of the history of Christianity, a charitable reading, and to describe these differences, but in an appreciative manner, and not say we come down to this is the truth, but to say this is how different people for different reasons would have placed an emphasis, and here's what we can probably learn from or be inspired by of how they did that, but without coming down on a point and saying this is the truth and everybody else is false. So we want to have a generous reading of the broad tradition, I would say, a generous orthodoxy would be the kind of approach that we would take to these differences.
And I suppose if we have any sort of in and outs, I think Nicaea pretty much is our main criteria for what we would consider within the Christian tradition. I think we are quite committed to a strong ecumenicalism within our project. So even in our team, we're a very ecumenical team. So, I'm Anglican, we have Roman Catholics, we have people in the Swiss Reformed Church. In our wider research community, we've got those from the Eastern Orthodox tradition and the Coptics. And so I think we are trying to really balance telling the story in all its diversity without compromising, I suppose, the fundamental truth of Christ.
Mm-hmm. Oh, you mentioned Nicaea, which of course is a historical controversy in its own right, isn't it? I mean, you get the Jehovah's Witnesses will knock on your door and they will say, you only believe what you believe because Constantine was in power and he enforced. So what is the relationship then, tell us, between history and apologetics, of explaining and defending the Christian truth? Because, I mean, it seems to be woven all through history, doesn't it? Tell us how you use history and what use history has got in some of the ways that we're going to be asked about our faith today.
So from my perspective, I think as a pastor, I have always noticed in my preaching that when I include stories from history, whether it's, beautiful stories from the Protestant missions or from the medieval church or the early church, or commentaries from theologians born 1,000 years ago, that's always been an incredibly edifying experience for people. People often come up to me afterwards saying, like, I didn't know these stories existed. I didn't know people had the same experience as I do today. And I think that's been, a particularly powerful and winsome thing that I've encountered when people respond to talks I've given. I think apologetically, and maybe Ola can speak more into this, but there's a sense in which a lot of the questions that we're asking today, or many of the questions that many people ask throughout, their spiritual formation, there's a reassuring aspect in which they've been asked before. So I think a really clear question around Old Testament, New Testament God, they seem very different. That question has been played out since the 2nd century. And I think being kind of familiar with the global aspects and the historical aspects of the church really, I think, are quite reassuring in terms of that Christians have been thinking quite carefully about things for a very, very, very long time. And that I find has often been quite a powerful tool, both for discipleship and edification for Christians, but also in apologetics, when people realize that their questions about faith aren't brand new to the last 2 minutes, but have been asked thousands of times with really good answers. So that would be where I would land on the role between history and apologetics.
Yeah. And then I would just add to that I think showing the richness of different ways of interpreting things actually adds to the fullness of who God is beyond what we can grasp with our sort of limited understanding as human beings. So there are real tensions. They do matter. We wouldn't want to relativize them. But I think just the main access point, if you think in terms of apologetics or people who are now interested in the faith who maybe haven't, when you talk about sort of the quiet revival, young people coming into the church, they need like a first access point that sort of gives something like a coherent way to read this, that doesn't close down on further exploration, further clarification, etc. But sort of when people come to the Christian faith from the outside, we want to give them something like at least one constructive way of how you could look at this. And for example, Constantine, which will be our next episode that we're now just in the process of writing up, we do actually say it's a complicated question. There are some clear benefits, there are some clear dangers that came with what happened there, and we cannot resolve this. Not historically can we resolve it, but also theologically, there are open questions that remain. We'll still have a certain framing, of course. You won't get around that, but we try to do it as much as a conversation starter as possible, and not as the foreclosing of a continuous conversation about these truths and these realities.
I'm just waiting to find out if Constantine was genuinely converted or not, whether it was just a flag of convenience. So I'll wait for your episode to come out on that. And the great question of the ages could be settled.
Yeah. I'm sorry if you're not covering that. Maybe you should do. That's the question.
If you're enjoying today's podcast, would you carefully consider supporting the ministry of Solas? We do all kinds of work in evangelism and evangelism training and creating resources all over the UK, working with all kinds of churches to share the gospel. If you'd be willing to support us for as little as £4 a month, we will send you 2 copies of our book, Have You Ever Wondered? One for you to read and one for you to give away to someone who isn't yet a Christian. Hop over to our website, solas, solas-cpc.org, and look for the donate button at the bottom of the page. Thank you so much for considering supporting the ministry. And now, back to the program.
Yeah, I suppose that's interesting because people are coming through the prism of, obviously, people who aren't Christians would be looking at history already with a sort of negative slant. You mentioned in your publicity, what about the Crusades, for example? I suppose you mentioned the complexity of some of these things. I mean, what do you say to someone who's coming into history and looking at, for example, the Crusades and looking at your material? How do you navigate them past that and actually perhaps help people see the bigger picture as well as the complexity?
I think when a lot of people come at Christian history with a negative view, or even a positive view, actually, the truth is they know nothing about it. The truth is most people know nothing about the history, actually. And I think what we've been discovering in a quite edifying, encouraging way is that the deeper you dig, A, the more complex it gets, but also B, kind of the more reassuring it gets too as a Christian. And so with the Crusades, for example, again, we haven't started the research on this, but most people have no idea about how many there were, for example, or who the main actors were, or what the actual Crusaders as Christians thought, and what the main actual tensions were. And so in some ways, I think by bringing things to light, that is in some ways a way through it. We are being led by our research. We are being led by what we do know about the facts. And in some ways, by bringing to light even the great sins of the church and contending with it theologically, I think that in and of itself is a wonderful witness in some ways to the world, that we are willing to look at our skeletons and we are willing to navigate it. And we're also willing to give them a proper adjudication, that actually it's more complex than it seems, like with everything.
Yeah. And we actually do believe in our process, which would be something like this. How will the episode on the Crusades, which we cannot spoiler here because we haven't gone through the process, come to be? We have a historian, we have a theologian. They write something like a pretty long or mid-sized format dossier based on the research they will do on this particular theme. We will send this dossier to feedback ecumenically to experts in the field and to include different perspectives on this, who will sort of refine this dossier. And then on the basis of that, we'll write up a script, which again will go through various iterations, which then will end us up in production and animation and turn out the final video, which you'll see on YouTube. But then alongside of it, the dossier. And so hopefully you'll get a fairly balanced account and a well thought out account of the Crusades, as well as a dossier which goes deeper and then references even more literature that you can follow up if you're interested in that. And so that's how we do these things. And so far, the experience has been that the process of actually going through the motions of debating it, discussing it together, getting external feedback yields something that seems fairly open, opening up of a conversation and waking interest in people to understand more and go deeper into these kinds of questions.
And I think it's really, really important. I think a lot of people think that history is dead and don't realize the extent to which history is just kind of living all around us, isn't it? I mean, if you're involved in any kind of dialogue with Muslim people, the Crusades is a live issue. We mentioned earlier on about if the JWs come to your door, the Council of Nicaea is a live issue. And then when Alice Roberts from the British Humanist Association wanted to attack the Christian faith, she wrote a history book, so it's or a very contested history book, which she's currently on tour with. So it really is a live space. It's really good that that is an area that you are engaging people with at a popular level, because I think sometimes some of our Christian responses have been at academic level and we're not reaching people. And the way that you've chosen to reach people is through animation. So tell us about why you've chosen animation as your tool of taking some real learning and scholarship and making that kind of accessible and available at the popular level, given that this area is just so significant.
Yeah. The reason why animation is basically because it gives you the possibility to show things to which we don't have any access now. So a lot of the videos we will be writing and already have been writing are dealing with phases from history from which we have a ruin here, a coin there, some texts describing things. But part of the appeal of animation is that you can sort of create a world, which then, of course, is to a certain degree imaginative, that opens up history in a way that you just couldn't do with pure text or with just showing historical or archaeological materials. And the other thing is it's a language consideration. We want the Christian story to spread in that sense. Our videos to be accessible in different regions and areas. So we're already now in conversations about translating them from English to German to French. We have Arab friends who would love to translate it to Arabic.
Wow.
And some of the Slavic languages. And then, of course, when it's not talking heads in a specific language, but it's sort of a backing track and animated videos, it's very easy to translate them to different languages and thus spread it further. So that's one of the considerations, at least.
Yeah, it's a timeless medium in many ways. I think visual design and architecture and filmmaking does change quite quickly, whereas animation is quite eternal, I think, in its form. And I suppose YouTube is also a primary decision we made as well. Why YouTube? And I think ultimately YouTube is television today. It's the most watched streaming service in the world. Over 2.5 billion people use it on a monthly basis. People now use it literally on TVs. I think TV is the fastest growing device that people are watching it on. And I think that is the space where people are going for primary entertainment and content and consumption. And we just also have a real passion that we want our resources to be free forever. I think we have had incredible feedback from people all around the world using it in Bible studies and church services even, and seminaries from Ethiopia and Latin America and places all over the world. And it's just, I think we would want the Christian story to be available to everyone for free. It's even why we don't have ads on our videos, if you notice. We demonetized our videos.
Yeah. One of the things that actually was moving us was the feedback. A lot of the feedback and comments is from people very highly appreciative of the quality and the visual aesthetics and the form of how these videos are produced. So we have this no AI policy, the idea of saying we want to tell the story of Jesus, God incarnated, becoming human, with actual human hands and human minds being involved, and not generating these contents with AI systems. And it's just beautiful to see that it's a lot of investment in terms of time, of energy, of resources, a lot of craftsmanship that goes into this. And it's just a great joy to see that people actually appreciate it and feedback as much on the content. Do they feedback and comment on the visual form with which it's being told, the story?
Thank you. Yeah, I must say I was very struck watching the videos. The one, for example, of the early Christian graffiti and it actually being drawn, and the voiceover that comes with that, and as you say, some of the feedback. I was struck. Someone said, I'm a visual person. This is exactly what I need to sort of understand the Christian message in a deeper way. And I just thought that was lovely to see some of those. So I know what you mean. The other thing you're doing is you're telling stories, and of course, stories are very powerful in communicating messages. And obviously, we are all sort of buying into different narratives that are hitting us. I wondered if you could say a little bit about why you chose that sort of storytelling as a way of connecting people with the Christian faith.
To be honest, to some degree, we're doing this whole project for us as well. So we just thought, what do we actually need? And sort of getting familiar with the big story, but also the smaller stories, and being inspired by how people lived is part of the perks of doing this project. And it's also the idea. The idea is this is supposed to reach non-believers with something that they like, an access point maybe to this larger story of the Christian faith, but also it's something that should educate us as a church. It should equip us to understand better where we're coming from, what our family history is, and then would maybe also just be the resource you would feel comfortable to forward to a friend. So we just believe that this is powerful, and I experience it as powerful as we're diving into these stories, that it does something with my faith, with my perspective on life, and how I read my own biography and vocation as a Christian. And we just want to share that with as many people as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And part of it's also the simply mercenary truth of optimizing for YouTube. I think it's an incredibly competitive space. You've got people who are, broadcast level production companies on YouTube channels. And part of it is simply to make the story engaging, simply worthwhile watching, that anyone who isn't a history buff can still watch a 12, 30-minute video, as opposed to a 45-minute lecture or a 2-hour strange meandering documentary. So the part of it is simply wanting to make our videos accessible to people.
And what have you covered so far? And let me ask each of you, what has been your favorite episode so far? And ask each of you as well, what's been the most significant feedback or audience response that you've got? I'm particularly interested on how people who aren't Christians have engaged with the material and how they're responding to it. So favorite episode and favorite feedback from each of you. Who wants to start? Daniel?
Yeah, I'll start. They're different. The feedback and the video is different. So I think my favorite video personally is we did an episode on Christology. So the first 300 years of Christology. So looking at the key main heresies of the first centuries, Valentinianism, Gnosticism, Marcionism, and all the kind of complex, annoying theological words that we often hear maybe if you go to seminary, all the way through to Nicaea, where we have the Creed. And I think it was an amazing video because truly I was so nervous at how we're going to bring quite technical theology to life in a really compelling storytelling narrative. And the creative team just had this incredible solve to how to articulate theological intricacy in a really visual form. And so the way they articulate the Gnostic sort of theology and Marcion and the kind of Christian theologians too, was just so stunning, spectacular. So for me, purely in terms of thinking, me not thinking it was possible to bring that to life, we managed to do it. And the creative team had an amazing solve for something that I thought was impossible. In terms of my favorite feedback, actually the most recent Martyrs video has had some really interesting feedback from Christians in Nigeria. So our most recent video goes through the early Christian martyrs, those who died for their faith in the Roman colosseums and amphitheaters. And in the comments, we've had some beautiful people writing from Nigeria who, as you know, are going through persecution right now, and people dying for their faith right now in their country, and just telling us and thanking us about how timely this video is for them and their church. And so just the idea that our video is edifying friends of martyrs right now is just quite humbling and inspiring.
Wonderful. Oliver?
I mean, we only have 5 videos so far, so 2 have already been described. So I would have said and will say, for me, actually, it's also the Martyrs episode that's the most touching one, because it tells that story and just gives, I think, a very intimate but also a theological actual reading of what they were doing and how they would conceive of what they're doing as living their lives for Jesus, and also engaging in something like a spiritual dimension, a spiritual warfare behind sort of the power dynamics of the Roman Empire as what's going on there. And I just, was myself really moved by it. And then it goes through, and it does say, sort of, we start with the earliest accounts that we have, but this actually hasn't stopped. People have been persecuted for their faith and still are today. And the response that's generated has really been moving. I think overall, reading the comments is a really encouraging experience for me. From atheists, somebody's explicitly saying, I'm an atheist, but I have an interest in history and you intrigue me. That's why I watch these videos. All the way to just a lot of people being very, very kind and generous and saying, we waited for this. We're inspired by this. Thank you for what you're doing. We're praying for you guys. And one guy or woman, I don't know, but one comment writing, I was here when you had 100 subscribers, and I will be here when you have 1 million. It was really encouraging and the right kind of spirit that we want to have for this. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. And it, as you say, it's just a reminder, isn't it, of the close connection between the past and the present, and actually how these things these historic debates are not just debates for many of us today. I wondered if you could give some advice. Let's say people have been inspired by hearing what you have done. What advice do you have for perhaps someone who's thinking, actually, I would love to get involved with using my creativity to communicate the gospel message, perhaps on a digital platform? Do you have any advice for that? And also, how can we get more information about Christian Story?
Yeah, and any advice? I would say the thing that has been the most beautiful about Christian Story is the coming together of an amazing team. I think every single person on the team is bringing with them something very particular and very unique that comes into making this final video. And I think if there is someone out there who is passionate, I think especially if you have a vision for creating something in that space, whether it's a podcast or whether it's a YouTube channel, I think having the right partners with you is absolutely crucial. Whether it's just simply, you two having a good back and forth, or whether you need someone who can run some of the creative stuff or do some of the research, or just, I think, getting the right people and praying for those people to come into your life, I think, is probably the most important advice, especially if your heart and vision is for something a bit more comprehensive in its final output.
Mm. And I just an accompanying thought to this is the way you communicate has to correspond with what you communicate. And so I think if part of what we're trying to do is invite people into the Christian story, which is actually inviting them into the communion of saints and communion with God. So we wanted this process of what we're doing, how we're doing it, to be communal as well. That's why it's not just one of us alone with our digital platform and the followership, but it's actually a team that together tries to bring some of that to life. And so I think if it's about sharing the gospel and with creativity, I do think, as Dan said, praying for the right friends, the right team, a communion of believers with whom together you engage in this endeavor is part of the thing you want to communicate in our day and age.
And I think we've got time for one more question. So, Oliver, I'm going to ask you, where can people go online to find your stuff? Not just the videos, but also you mentioned the dossier resources behind them as well. And then, Daniel, tell us, how can people, if they want to support you, I know that these videos are crowdfunded, where can people go to join in that? So, Oliver, tell us where people can go to find the resources. Daniel, tell us how people can chip in to support the ongoing work.
So we have a website that's called christianstory.com where you can find us. You can find us on YouTube, of course, if you type in Christian Story. And within each video in the description, we have links to everything if you want to follow up to the dossier and all of the resources that you need.
And in terms of support, of course, you can pray for us. Of course, please go watch the videos in full, give us a comment, subscribe to our channel. And we would love to ask you to support us financially as well. We're completely crowdfunded. We want our videos to be free forever. And on our website, we have some great portals where either you can give one-off to fund our next episode. So that's going to be Constantine. So that's going to be our most exciting video so far, I think. Or you can start giving monthly, which will really help us out, kind of plan more long-term in terms of how we can progress this project. We are finishing off the early church the next couple months. And then afterwards, we're going to be going to a series on the history of Christians in the Persian Empire before and during and after the rise of Islam. It's a very under-researched part of history, but I think it's going to be really exciting to hear more of the stories of Christians living under and through the Islamic rise.
Absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much. I love the way that every fortnight we get to speak to people who are doing something different in sharing their faith. And this has really been different and really interesting. I love the way you're using your creative gifts and your historical knowledge and animation to get the Christian story out into the world. Brilliant. Fantastic. Thank you so much, both of you, Oliver and Daniel, joining up Oxford and Switzerland in this sort of around the world edition of Pep Talk. We will be back in a fortnight with different guests, all about sharing the gospel of Christ in a needy world. We will see you in a fortnight's time. Thank you so much for listening, and goodbye.